Excerpts from Diderot's early philosophical works. Aphorisms 15 through 22, 1746. Translated and edited by Margaret Jourdain. By Denis Diderot, 1713 to 1784. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Aphorism 15. I tell you there is no God, that creation is a fiction, that the eternity of the universe is no more a difficulty than the eternity of spirit, that because I do not see how motion could have caused this universe, though it keeps it going, it is ridiculous to solve the difficulty by supposing the existence of a being of whom I can have no real conception. That if the wonders of the physical universe show some intelligence, the confusions in the moral order are the negations of a providence. I tell you, if everything is the work of a God, everything should be the best possible. For if everything is not the best possible, it is impotence or malevolence on the part of God. Therefore it is fortunate that I am not better informed as to his existence. If it were proved satisfactorily, and it is by no means proved, that all evil is the source of good, that it was for the best that Britannicus, the best of princes, perished, and that Nero, the worst of men, should reign, how is it possible to prove that it was impossible to attain the same ends without using such means? To allow vice in order to throw virtue into relief is a poor advantage in comparison with its real disadvantage. That, says the atheist, is my case. What have you to say to it? That I am a miserable wretch, and that if I had nothing to fear from God, I should not be disputing his existence. Let us leave such an answer to orators. It may be untrue. Politeness forbids it, and it has no savor of charity about it. Because a man is mistaken in his denial of God, should we insult him? People only take refuge in invective when they run short of proofs. Of two engaged in argument, it is 100 to 1 that the man in the wrong will become angry. You thunder instead of answering, says Menippus to Jupiter. Are you then in the wrong? Aphorism 16. One day somebody asked a man if real atheists existed. Do you think, he responded, that real Christians exist? Aphorism 17. None of the vain speculations of metaphysics have the cogency of an argument ad hominem. In order to convince, it is sometimes only necessary to rouse the physical or moral instinct. The Pyrrhonist was convinced by a stick that he was wrong in doubting his own existence. Cartouche, pistol in hand, might have taught Hobbes a similar lesson. Your money or your life, we are alone, I am the stronger, and between us there is no question of justice. Aphorism 18. It is not from the metaphysician that atheism has received its most vital attack. The sublime meditations of Malebranche and Descartes were less calculated to shake materialism than a single observation of Malpighi's. If this dangerous hypothesis is tottering at the present day, it is to experimental physics that the result is due. It is only in the works of Newton, of Muchenbroek, of Harzoker, and of Newinton that satisfactory proofs have been found of the existence of a reign of sovereign intelligence. Thanks to the works of these great men, the world is no longer a god. It is a machine with its wheels, its cords, its pulleys, its springs, and its weights. Aphorism 19. The subtleties of ontology have at best made skeptics, and it was reserved for the knowledge of nature to make true deists. The discovery of germs alone has destroyed one of the most powerful arguments of atheism, whether motion be essential or accidental to matter. I am now convinced that its effects are limited to developments. All experiments agree in proving to me that putrefaction alone never produced any organism. I can allow that the mechanism of the vilest insect is not less marvellous than that of man, and I am not afraid of the inference that as an intestinal agitation of molecules is able to produce the one, it is probable that it has produced the other. If an atheist had maintained 200 years ago that some day perhaps people would see men spring full formed from the bowels of the earth, just as we see a mass of insects swarm in putrefying flesh, I would like to know what a metaphysician would have had to say to him. Footnote: Diderot here alludes to Redi's experiments about the generation of insects, and in the preceding thought he alludes to the discoveries due to the telescope and microscope. End of footnote. Aphorism 20. It was in vain that I made use of scholastic subtleties against the atheist. He found among his feeble reasons one argument of some validity. A multitude of useless verities are proved to me without any doubt, he said, and the existence of God, the reality of moral good and moral evil, and the immortality of the soul are still problems for me. What! Is it less important for me to be informed on these subjects than to be sure that the 3 angles of a triangle are together equal to 2 right angles? While, like a skilful orator, he made me taste the full bitterness of this reflection, I joined battle with him again with a question that must have appeared singular to a man flushed with his first success. "Are you a thinking being?" I asked. "Can you doubt it?" he answered with a pleased air. "Why not? What have I seen to prove it? Sounds and movements? But the philosopher sees the same in an animal to whom he denies the faculty of thought. Why should I allow you what Descartes refuses the ant? Externally, your actions are designed to give me that impression. I should be tempted to maintain that you do think, but reason suspends my judgment. Between external actions and thought my reason tells me there is no essential connection. It is possible that your antagonist thinks no more than his watch. Must one take for a thinking being the first animal taught to speak? Who has informed you that all men are not so many well-trained parrots?" "That is very ingenious," he returned, "but it is not by motion or sounds, but by the continuity of ideas, the connection between propositions, and the links of the argument that one must judge if a creature thinks. If there was a parrot that could answer every question, I should say at once that it was a thinking being. But what has this to do with the existence of God? If you were to prove to me that the most intelligent man were perhaps but an automaton, should I be the more disposed to recognize an intelligent being in nature?" "That is my affair," said I, "but admit that it would be madness not to credit your brother men with the faculty of thought." "Of course, but what follows?" "It follows that if the universe— but why drag in the universe? If a butterfly's wing shows me proof of an intelligence 1,000 times stronger than the proof you have that your fellow man thinks, it would be 1,000 times more foolish to deny that God exists than to deny that your fellow man thinks. I appeal to your knowledge, to your conscience. Have you ever observed in any man more intelligence, order, wisdom, and reasonableness than in the mechanism of an insect? Is not the deity as clearly apparent in the eye of a flesh worm as in the works of the great Newton? What does the formation of the world afford less proof of intelligence than its explanation? What a position! But, you reply, I admit the faculty of thought in another the more readily as I myself think. That is an analogy I admit I cannot use, but against this must be set the superiority of my proofs to yours. Is not the intelligence of a first cause more conclusively proved in nature by his works than the faculty of reasoning in a philosopher by his writings? Remember, I only adduced a butterfly's wing, a flesh worm's eye, when I could crush you with the weight of the entire universe. I am greatly deceived if this proof is not well worth the best that was ever issued from the schools. It is by this argument, and others equally simple, that I am convinced of the existence of a God, and not by those tissues of dry and metaphysical ideas, which are better calculated to give to truth an air of falsity than to unveil it. Aphorism 21. I open the pages of a celebrated professor. Weir in his edition says that Yuval, who was then professor of philosophy, is here meant, but the argument which follows is a well-known one. And I read, Atheists, I concede to you that movement is essential to matter. What conclusion do you draw from that? That the world is a result of a fortuitous concourse of atoms? You might as well tell me that Homer's Iliad or Voltaire's Henrietta is the result of a fortuitous concourse of written characters. I should be very sorry to use that argument to an atheist. He would make quick work of the comparison. According to laws of the analysis of chance, he would say, I ought not to be surprised that a thing happens, when it is possible and the difficulty of the result is compensated by the number of throws. There is a certain number of throws in which I would back myself to bring 100,000 sixes at once with 100,000 dice. Whatever the definite number of letters with which I am invited fortuitously to create the Iliad, there is a certain definite number of throws which would make the venture advantageous to me. Indeed, my advantage would be infinite, if the number of throws permitted me were infinite. You grant me that matter exists from all eternity, and that movement is essential to it. In return for this concession, I will suppose, as you do, that the world has no limits, that the multitude of atoms is infinite, and that this order which causes you astonishment nowhere contradicts itself. Well, from these mutual admissions there follows nothing else unless it be the possibility of fortuitously creating the universe is very small, but that the quantity of throws is infinite. That is to say, that the difficulty of the result is more than sufficiently compensated by the multitude of throws. Therefore, if anything ought to be repugnant to reason, it is the supposition that, matter being in motion from all eternity, and there being perhaps in the infinite number of possible combinations an infinite number of admirable arrangements, none of these admirable arrangements would have ensued out of the infinite multitude of those which matter took unsuccessively. Therefore, the mind ought to be more astonished at the hypothetical duration of chaos than at the actual birth of the universe. Aphorism 22. I divide atheists into three classes. There are some who tell you openly there is no God, and are convinced of this. These are genuine atheists. There is a fairly large number of people who do not know what to think, and would be glad to decide the question by tossing up. These are skeptical atheists, and a still larger number who wish there was no God, and who pretend to be convinced of his non-existence and live in harmony with this conviction. These are the braggadocios of the party. I detest braggarts, they are dishonest. I pity genuine atheists. All consolation is dead to them, and I pray God for the skeptics. They lack knowledge. End of excerpts from Diderot's early philosophical works. Aphorisms 15 through 22, 1746. Translated and edited by Margaret Jourdain. By Denis Diderot. 1713 to 1784.
An entry for November 10th, 1838, from the Journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson, edited by Edward Waldo Emerson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. November 10th, 1838. My brave Henry Thoreau walked with me to Walden this afternoon, and complained of the proprietors who compelled him, to whom as much as to any the whole world belonged, to walk in a strip of road, and crowded him out of all the rest of God's earth. He must not get over the fence, but to the building of that fence he was no party. Suppose, he said, some great proprietor, before he was born, had bought up the whole globe, so had he been hustled out of nature. Not having been privy to any of these arrangements, he does not feel called on to consent to them, and so cuts fish poles in the woods without asking who has a better title to the wood than he. I defended, of course, the good institution as a scheme. Not good, but the best that could be hit on for making the woods and waters and fields available to wit and worth, and for restraining the bold, bad man. At all events, I begged him, having this maggot of freedom and humanity in his brain, to write it out into good poetry, and so clear himself of it. He replied that he feared that that was not the best way, that in doing justice to the thought, the man did not always do justice to himself. The poem ought to sing itself. If the man took too much pains with the expression, he was not any longer the idea himself. I acceded, and confessed that this was the tragedy of art, that the artist was at the expense of the man, and hence, in the first age, as they tell, the sons of God printed no epics, carved no stone, painted no pictures, built no railroad, for the sculpture, the poetry, the music, and architecture were in the man. And truly, bolts and bars do not seem to me the most exalted or exalting of our institutions. And what other spirit reigns in our intellectual works? We have literary property. The very recording of a thought betrays a distrust that there is any more or much more as good for us. If we felt that the universe was ours, that we dwelled in eternity and advance into all wisdom, we should be less covetous of these sparks and cinders. Why should we covetously build a St. Peter's if we had the seeing eye which beheld all the radiance of beauty and majesty in the matted grass and the overarching boughs? Why should a man spend years upon the carving an Apollo, who looked Apollos into the landscape with every glance he threw? End of an entry for November 10th, 1838, from the Journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson, edited by Edward Waldo Emerson. Read for LibriVox by Sue Anderson.
"43 Days in an Open Boat," compiled from Personal Diaries, by Mark Twain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. The superb clipper ship Hornet, Captain Josiah Mitchell, sailed out of New York harbor about the first week in January, 1866, bound for San Francisco. She had a quick passage around the Horn and experienced no ill luck of any kind until just after crossing the equator, upward bound in the Pacific. Then, on the morning of the 3rd of May, she took fire and was burned up, and the crew and passengers, with 10 days' provisions saved from the vessel, found themselves adrift in 3 open boats. Each boat had a compass, a quadrant, a copy of Bowditch's Navigator, and a nautical almanac, and the captain's and chief mate's boats had chronometers. There were 31 men all told. The captain took an account of stock, with the following result: 4 hams, nearly 30 pounds of salt pork, half box of raisins, 100 pounds of bread, 12 2-pound cans of oysters, clams and assorted meats, a keg containing 4 pounds of butter, 12 gallons of water and a 40-gallon scuttlebutt, 4 1-gallon demijohns full of water, 3 bottles of brandy, the property of passengers, some pipes, matches, and 100 pounds of tobacco. No medicines. Of course, the whole party had to go on short rations at once. The captain kept a log, and so did each of the 2 passengers, Samuel and Henry Ferguson, aged 28 and 18 respectively, young gentlemen making their first sea voyage. The plain matter-of-fact journal of the elder Ferguson was as interesting to me as a novel, notwithstanding I knew all the circumstances of the desperate voyage in the open boat before I read it. I give it entire, adding extracts from the other logs occasionally. A perusal of the diary for the 2nd of May will introduce the reader to the cheerful, home-like ship before she takes her final leave of the stage. Samuel Ferguson's Diary. May 2nd. Latitude 1° 28' north, longitude 111° 38' west. Another hot and sluggish day. At one time, however, the clouds promised wind, and there came a slight breeze, just enough to keep us going. The only thing to chronicle to-day is the quantities of fish about. 9 bonitas were caught this forenoon and some large albacores seen. After dinner the first mate hooked a fellow which he could not hold, so he let the line go to the captain, who was on the bow. He, holding on, brought the fish to with a jerk, and snap with the line, hook and all. We also saw astern, swimming lazily after us, an enormous shark, which must have been 9 or 10 feet long. We tried him with all sorts of lines and a piece of pork, but he declined to take hold. I suppose he had appeased his appetite on the heads and other remains of the bonitas we had thrown overboard. May 3rd. At 7 a.m. fire broke out down Booby Hatch. The boats got off safe, and all hands. Compute our latitude at 2° 20' north and longitude 112° 10' west. The ship burned very rapidly. 2 hours after the fire broke out, the main mast fell over the side and dragged the mizzen top mast with it. Saved nothing but what we had on, except our overcoats. Got in as much provisions and water as time would allow. Stayed by the burning ship all day and night. Divided forces, 14 in the long boat and 9 and 8 men in the 2 quarter boats. Our boat, the long boat, was in command of Captain Mitchell, and the other boats were in charge of the first and second mates. Rations, 1/2 biscuit for breakfast, 1 biscuit and some canned meat for dinner, and 1/2 biscuit for tea, with a few swallows of water at each meal. May 4th. The ship burned all night very brightly, and hopes are that some ship has seen the light and is bearing down upon us. None seen, however, this forenoon, so we have determined to go together north and a little west to some islands in 18° to 19° north latitude, and 114° to 115° west longitude, hoping in the meantime to be picked up by some ship. The ship sank suddenly at about 5 a.m. We find the sun very hot and scorching, but all try to keep out of it as much as we can. The men stand it so far well, though we have 3 or 4 on board who have been sick and disabled for some time. Though we have had none yet, we hope in this latitude to have plenty of showers, which will work 2 ways, however, as they must wet our provisions and also kill the wind. Our course today has been north by east. Our water rations are increased while we are in the doldrums, where we have 2 frequent showers. May 5th. Last night was a very unpleasant one. It rained very hard, and it was mighty hard stowage. We all got some sleep. Today has been overcast, so we have not suffered from the burning sun as we otherwise should. We caught a good deal of water last night, and have now more than we had when we left the ship. The captain computes our latitude at about 4° north. The captain, my brother Henry, myself, the 3rd mate, and 9 men lead in the long boat, which having most sail, Hornet's maintop gallant studding sail, tows the other 2, the 1st mate's coming next, and the 2nd mate's last. We made a good run till about midnight, when the wind lessened a good deal. So far everything goes on as well as can be expected. The men are in good spirits, though we all have a pretty hard time. We were enabled to keep on our course until showers and squalls headed us off. Sunday, May 6th. This morning began very stormy and squally. It rained very hard, and one time the sea was very wicked, the waves broken and dangerous, what sailors call a cobbling sea. Everybody became soaked, of course, bread got wet, with fresh water, however. Wind very light until 1 p.m., then a rain squall. We keep on the lookout all the time for a sail. In the evening it rained again, making everything very disagreeable. This boat is a very disagreeable one. What with a large water cask, the bag of bread, and the bags belonging to the men, there is hardly any room left. We naturally thought often of all at home, and were glad to remember that it was Sacrament Sunday, and that prayers would go up from our friends for us, although they know not our peril. We read and said our prayers as best we could for the rain. Not much wind. First part of the night very rainy and uncomfortable. May 7th. Henry got the best sleep last night he has had yet. The captain also got a few good cat naps, the first he has had during the 4 days and nights since we lost the ship. Wind light until 7 or 8 o'clock, when it freshened up and gave us a high and cobbling sea, much worse than any we have seen in a good while. The other boats get on well, and are much better sea boats than this chunk we are in. Not that I have any reason to complain of her action. Upon consultation, the captain thought best to steer more easterly to an island called Clipperton Rock, which is decidedly the nearest. Suppose we do not find it, we shall still stand in the highway of ships, and also make a good deal of casting, by which we are better able to make the isles further north, they being in latitude 18° to 20° north, and longitude 111° to 131° west. About 10 o'clock we headed east-northeast, and hoped to find Clipperton Island in latitude 10° 28', and longitude 109° 19'. The bread department of our provisions is decidedly our weak point. The captain places no reliance upon the chronometers on account of their constant disarrangement by the plunging of the boat, but he means to take sights now and then, as they keep together tolerably well. May 8th. Last night a series of calms and light breezes, during which we had wind in all directions, rained but not hard till morning, when about 6 it began and kept it up pretty regularly, wet everything and everybody again. No wind all day. About noon it cleared off and came out hot. Second mate's boat desiring to row, we went to the rear, and each boat took to the white ash, that is, to the oars. Saw plenty of dolphins, but could not catch any. I think we are all beginning more and more to realize the awful situation we are in. It often takes a ship a week to get through the doldrums. How much longer, then, such a craft as ours, which cannot sail within 7 to 8 points of the wind. We are so crowded that we cannot stretch ourselves out for a good sleep, but have to take it in any way we can get it. I am glad I managed to get aboard my 3 bottles of brandy. It will do us good service. May 9th. Last night was a pleasant one, no rain of any account, so most of the day was spent in drying our wet clothes and blankets. Early in the evening the second mate's boat took the lead, rowing, when shortly a breeze sprang up, and they made sail, continuing to row. We reefed our sail and set it, and so soon caught up that we took the lead, then shook out the reef. We have been highly favoured in being able to keep together so well. The sun is very hot indeed, and gave me a warning to keep out of it as much as possible, and a very peculiar doubling of the sight when looking with both eyes, while either one the vision was unmarred. Looking with both eyes on the horizon, crossed thus: X. Lying down in the shade of the sail soon banished the trouble, however, and I am all right now. Henry keeps well, but broods over our troubles more than I wish he did. Caught today 2 dolphins, had part of one cooked in a pan. It tasted well. Turned in about 7:30 o'clock, and slept pretty well till 12, then turned out to give Henry a chance. Had a good breeze and no rain. The captain believed the compass out of the way, but the long invisible North Star came out, a welcome sight, and endorsed the compass. May 10th. Latitude 7 degrees 0 minutes 3 seconds north, longitude 111 degrees 32 minutes west. Drifting in calms all day. Even as the captain says, all romance has long since vanished, and I think most of us are beginning to look the fact of our awful situation full in the face. We are still in a good place to be picked up, but seem to make little or nothing on our course toward the Isles. We are so cramped up here that it makes it more trying than all else. They are not as provident as they should be in the third mate's boat. They have eaten up all the canned meats brought from the ship, and are now growing discontented. The men in the first mate's boat are careful and contented, however. The chronometers are going, but differ somewhat, and so they cannot be depended upon. We have been mercifully guarded against the destructive effects of these sudden and violent squalls. We have all the water we want. Today Joe caught some more dolphins and a small turtle. Charlie cooked a portion of the former. May 11th. Latitude 7 degrees, longitude 110 degrees 0 minutes 3 seconds. Standing still. Or worse, we lost more last night than we made yesterday. Caught some little rain, but not enough to fill up the water butts. The sun in the middle of the day is very powerful and makes it necessary to cover one's head. Today the mate's boat caught a turtle, so we have some meat, though we have to eat it raw. The cock that was rescued and pitched into the boat while the ship was on fire still lives, and crows with the breaking of dawn, cheering us all a good deal. The second mate's boat again want water today, showing that they overdrink their allowance. The captain spoke pretty sharply to them. From appearances they ought to be able to catch enough tonight. Have no reported sights of sails yet. In this latitude the horizon is filled with little upright clouds that look very much like ships. The men keep up well in our boat, and the captain serves out 2 tablespoonsful of brandy and water, half and half, to our crew. I offered 1 bottle of the brandy to the chief mate, but he declined, saying he could keep the afterboat quiet, and we had not enough for all. Henry Ferguson's diary to date, given in full. May 4, 5, 6, doldrums. May 7, 8, 9, doldrums. May 10, 11, 12, doldrums. Tells it all. Never saw, never felt, never heard, never experienced such heat, such darkness, such lightning and thunder, and wind and rain in my life before. May 12th. A good rain last night, and we caught a good deal, though not enough to fill up our tank, pails, etc. Our object is to get out of these doldrums, but it seems as if we cannot do it. Today we have had it very variable, and hope we are on the northern edge, though we are not much above 7 degrees. This morning we all thought we had made out a sail, but it was one of those deceiving clouds. Rained a good deal today, making all hands wet and uncomfortable. We filled up pretty nearly all our water pots, however. I hope we may have a fine night, for the captain certainly wants rest, and while there is any danger of squalls or danger of any kind, he is always on hand. I never would have believed that open boats such as ours, with their loads, could live in some of the seas we have had. We are all right so far, and as comfortable as can be expected. I feel the fatigue of the lack of exercise, together with the insufficiency of food, considerably. Henry seems to bear up pretty well, though looking at times pretty miserable. Sunday, May 13th. Last night was one of the finest nights we have had, no rain or squalls, though a variable set of winds. This morning finds us all pretty cheerful. During the night the cry of "a ship" brought us to our feet, but it proved to be only a star rising out of the water. Thought often of those at home today, and of the disappointment they will feel next Sunday at not hearing from us by telegraph from San Francisco. Today our rations were reduced to a quarter of a biscuit a meal, with about half a pint of water. We hope to catch more turtles and fish to eke out our small stores. The men, I am sorry to say, are improvident. They don't waste what they have, but would take 3 times as much as is necessary, if they could get it, and eat it instead of keeping it. May 14th. Today very showery, though last night was the most comfortable we have had. In the afternoon had a regular thunderstorm, which toward night seemed to close in around us on every side, making it very dark and squally. With great gratitude we saw the clouds break and stars once more appear. Our situation is becoming more and more desperate, for we have very little steady wind to make northing, and every day diminishes our small stock of provisions. We want to get to 18° north, and make some of the islands put down as lying thereabouts, but we'll have the northeast trades to contend against. They would be a good steady breeze, but with our sail and boat I doubt if we could sail within 8 points of the wind, certainly not while towing the other boats. We have one large compass, and the second mate another. My little compass that H gave me I have loaned to the first mate. The time must come soon when we must separate. May 15th. From 10 p.m. last night we had a more comfortable night, though everything was in a perfect sop. Wind baffling and very light, but made little progress. Spirits keep up, and I trust all will be well, but it is a terrible thing for us all so cramped and with no change of clothes. Sun out again hot, drying our wet things, but making it very scorching. We manage to head about north, but make very little progress. One blessing we have is a continued supply of water, which, as we must soon take the trades, is very important. The captain took a longitude sight this morning, but noon was too cloudy for latitude. This afternoon wind headed us off to nearly east, and threatened squalls and showers late in the evening. Joe caught another dolphin to-day. In his maw we found 1 flying fish and 2 skipjacks. Had a visit from a land bird to-day, which perched on the yard for a while. This shows that we cannot be far from Clipperton Rock, but whether we shall make it or not is very doubtful. May 16th. Last night was a very quiet and comfortable one as regards rain, though our limited space makes it very hard for sleeping for any length of time. We all keep well as yet, thank God, but are growing weaker. Today we have a wind from the northeast, which we hope will settle down to a good steady trade, and take us either to the islands or across some vessel's track. The first mate's crew are in good spirits, but they have lived very close and are pretty weak. The cock still lives, and daily carols forth his praise. We have yet eaten neither of the turtles. When we do we must eat them raw for want of means to cook them. No more fish caught to-day. Bids fair for a rainy night, which I do not mind if we can fill up our water butts. In Henry's log is mentioned that on the 17th one of those dire spectres of the deep, a water spout, stalked by them, and they trembled for their lives. With accustomed brevity and expressiveness he observes that it might have been a fine sight from a ship. Captain Mitchell's log for this day gives this item, only half bushel of breadcrumbs left. May 17th. Was stopped riding last evening by the rain, which continued steadily all night, with a heavy and dangerous sea. All day yesterday till 2 p.m. rained steadily, and a more uncomfortable set of wretches one cannot imagine. Today, however, we are drying a little. Today we were fortunate enough to catch a dolphin and a bonita. The latter, in its distress, took shelter under our rudder from a large swordfish that was hovering around, and which we dared not for our lives to try to catch or even molest. Today we have been 2 weeks in these egg shells, and it certainly seems as if we are to be saved. God grant that an end to our captivity may soon be sent. The men in all the boats seem pretty well, the feeblest of the sick ones, not able for a long time to stand his watch on board the ship, is wonderfully recovered. A great increase of birds about us this morning. Passed a most awful night. Rained hard nearly all the time, and blew in squalls, accompanied by terrific thunder and lightning from all points of the compass. Henry's log. Most awful night I ever witnessed. Captain's log. May 18th, latitude 11° 11'. Last night no rain of any consequence, had a pretty good night, drifted about till 2 a.m. when we got a good breeze which gave us our course. Mate came aboard today and reports all well with him but Peter, who has again got the fever, poor fellow. The third boat cooked the turtle the second boat caught, and mate reports the meat first rate. We talk of separating and must soon do so. We can tow one boat, but not 2. It seems too bad, but it must be done for the safety of the whole. At first I never dreamed, but now hardly shut my eyes for a cat nap without conjuring up something or other, to be accounted for by weakness, I suppose. Very likely we would have been in San Francisco tomorrow or next day had not our disaster happened. I should have liked to send B the telegram for her birthday. At 2 a.m. we took a brisk little breeze from southwest, which allowed us to run our course north by east. May 19th. Calm last night, rested pretty well. This morning Captain called up the 2 quarter boats and said one would have to go off on its own hook. Second mate would not go, so the first mate took his boat, and with 6 of the second mate's men who volunteered to go, with 2 of his own, in all 9, started early, and by 5 p.m. were out of sight to windward. Was very sorry to have the mate leave us, but all considered for the best. This morning we have had a most scorching and burning sun, making it almost intolerable. Very calm all day to about 4 p.m., when a slight breeze sprang up. It did not last very long, however. The mate's boat nowhere to be seen this morning. I hope he was more successful in catching water than we were. Water will now be a scarce article, for as we get out of the doldrums we shall only get showers now and then in the trades. This life is tolling severely on my strength. Henry holds out first rate. Sunday, May 20th. Latitude 12° 0' 9". Very little rain last night, none that we could save to put in the cask. No breeze to speak of. It is very strange that we do not get the trades, which usually come at 8° to 10°. We all watch anxiously for a sail, but as yet have only had visions of ships that came to naught, the semblance without the substance. God grant that the time is not far distant when we shall be picked up, for that is my greatest hope. The turtle which Joe caught served us for dinner yesterday and today, and very good it was. No fish about us today. We are daily in hopes of catching something, for it helps out our stores wonderfully. The second mate this afternoon succeeded in catching a booby, a bird as large as a wild duck. As they have no other meat, it will go well. May 21st. Fine breeze all night about east, quite as much as we could well stand. It soon brought up a sea, but we made a good night's work of it. No rain today, more squally, and the wind not steady. The second mate has been fortunate enough to catch 3 more boobies, and gave us 1. For dinner today we had half a can of mincemeat divided up and served round, which strengthened us somewhat. Just after dinner, during a little squall, and rolling very much, we sprung our mast so badly that it had to be taken down, cut off, and re-shipped. The sail was also altered. We may now be said to be on our trade wind. Our rigging, like ourselves, is rather weak, however. I believe I have not before stated that, in getting this long boat off the ship's deck, a large hole was stove on the starboard side of the keel. It has been caulked the best we could, but still we have to keep one man bailing all the while. One of the quarter boats also had an oar handle stove through her. We have headed today about northwest, which is perhaps well, for we hope we have easting enough to make some of the isles. If not, we are in better position to be picked up. May 22nd. Last night wind headed us off, so that part of the time we had to steer east-southeast, and then west-northwest, and so on. This morning we were all startled by a cry of "Sail ho!" Sure enough we could see it. And for a time we cut adrift from the second mate's boat and steered so as to attract its attention. This was about 5:30 a.m. After sailing in a state of high excitement for almost 20 minutes, we made it out to be the chief mate's boat. Of course we were glad to see them and have them report all well, but still it was a bitter disappointment to us all. Now that we are in the trades, it seems impossible to make northing enough to strike the Isles. We have determined to do the best we can and get in the route of vessels. Such being the determination, it became necessary to cast off the other boat, which, after a good deal of unpleasantness was done, we again dividing water and stores, and taking Cox into our boat. This makes our number 15. The second mate's crew wanted to all get in with us and cast the other boat adrift. It was a very painful separation. This afternoon caught a booby. May 23rd. A good breeze all night, allowing us to head about northwest or a little better. Took a longitude observation this morning, but the sun was overclouded at noon, so we could make out neither latitude nor longitude. Our chances as we go west increase in regard to being picked up, but each day our scanty fare is so much reduced. Without the fish, turtle, and birds sent us, I do not know how we should have got along. The other day I offered to read prayers morning and evening for the captain, and last night commenced. The men, although of various nationalities and religions, are very attentive and always uncovered. May God grant my weak endeavour its issue. Sea much gone down, and altogether a comfortable day. Wind regular trade, allowing us to head about northwest. Sun obscured nearly all day. We want a few good showers to fill up our cask, now twice heavily drawn upon in supplying the departing boats. These, however, I hope and trust will be sent in good time. We as yet suffer little from thirst, having as a ration about half a tumbler a meal. Besides, since the trades set in, it is not so hot or languid. No boobies nor fish to day. I am afraid our chance for fish after this is small, as few here bite at a trolling hook, and we have a fresh wind almost all the time. Turtles will be scarce also. However, I hope for birds. May 24th, latitude 14 degrees 18 minutes north. Headed about northwest all day. In the afternoon, heavy sea with the promise of a bad night. No birds or fish. Cans of oysters for dinner, which gave 5 oysters apiece and 3 spoonfuls of juice, which, with an eighth of a biscuit, made our allowance with about a gill of water. Such is our fare. God have mercy upon us all. We are all plainly getting weaker, there is no blinding ourselves to that sorrowful truth. Our best hope is to the westward, in the track of ships, and let go the isles, as we waste twice the time tacking for them. Such is the captain's notion. Ah, how I wish I had striven to get the rest of my whiskey. A spoonful of brandy with water has a marked effect upon us all. All the evening had a heavy and cobbling sea. May 25th. Last night was a very hard one till about 4 a.m., the sea breaking over our weather side, making everything wet and uncomfortable. Nor was the day any better. I think hardly anyone managed to keep entirely dry, sun not fully out all day. Tried, but could get no observation. These are splendid trades for a ship, but too much for our crank craft. Nothing particular happened to-day. My cramped position makes lying one way any length of time almost impossible, and one is sore almost all over. Plenty of flying fish about, but none disposed to come aboard. Passed at some distance a spar, but not near enough to see what it was. Saw also some whales blow. Weather misty, with very fine rain which is penetrating. Good prospect of just such another night as last. Great difference noticeable in the men in regard to close steering and keeping a dry boat. Though our meals are very slight and poor, men were never more eager for them or appreciated them better than we do. May 26th, latitude 15 degrees 50 minutes. Last night much more comfortable than the one before this. Occasionally we took some water. In the first watch, the watches are kept up 4 6-hour watches in a day, a large flying fish came aboard, and at about 4 a.m. we caught a booby, which will do for our dinners to-day. Both fish and flesh we have to eat raw after drying or baking in the sun, which has been so far a good hot one. The men growing weaker, and, I think, despondent. They say very little, though. We could not do better with the boat than sail within 8 points of the wind, particularly as the trades bring considerable sea, which aids to head us off. This beating is out of the question. It seems our best chance to get in and lie in the track of ships, with the hope that some one will run near enough our speck to see it. I fear for the other 2 boats, for the sea we had Thursday night and Friday was very hard for them. I hope they stood west and are picked up. Sunday, May 27th, latitude 16 degrees 0 minutes 5 seconds, longitude by chronometer 117 degrees 22 minutes. Our 4th Sunday. When we left the ship we reckoned on having about 10 days' supplies, and now we hope to be able, by rigid economy, to make them last another week if possible. Last night the sea was comparatively quiet, but the wind headed us off to about W.N.W., which has been about our course all day to-day. Another flying fish came aboard last night, and one more to-day, both small ones. No birds. A booby is a great catch, and a good large one makes a small dinner for the 15 of us. That is, of course, as dinners go in the Hornet's longboat. Tried this morning to read the full service to myself with the communion, but found it too much, am too weak and get sleepy, and cannot give strict attention, so I put off half until this afternoon. I trust God will hear the prayers gone up for us at home to-day, and graciously answer them by sending us succor and help in this our season of deep distress. The ship was fired by carelessly drawing some varnish with an open lamp in hand, the barrel of varnish being in the booby hatch, where are stored spare sails, riggings, etc. Orders had been given to have it on the deck to open. May 28th. Wind light and sea smooth last night, so that all hands, I hope, got a good 6 hours rest. This day wind freshened, enabling us to head about northwest. A good day for seeing a ship, but none to be seen. I still feel pretty well, but my legs are very weak. Henry bears up and keeps strength the best of any aboard, I think, thank God. My earnest prayer is that he may be saved at any rate and restored. Our only chance is in being picked up, unless providentially provided with more provisions in the shape of fish or birds, which now seem more and more scarce. I do not feel despondent at all, for I fully trust that the Almighty will hear our and the home prayers, and he who suffers not a sparrow to fall sees and cares for us, his creatures. May 29th. Good breezes last night, and not very rough after 9 o'clock. The moon is of great benefit to us, and a cheering comrade. I am sorry it is now on the wane. Today we changed to 2 meals a day, thereby to lengthen out our scanty stores as long as possible. We are all wonderfully well and strong, comparatively speaking, thanks to God and the good fare we had on board the ship. All the men are hearty and strong, even the ones that were down sick are well, except poor Peter, who had to be left to the second mate's boat. The 2 boats are ere this saved, or I fear for them. We have here a man who might have been a duke had not political troubles banished him from Denmark. He is one of our best men, have to-day quite enjoyed a chat with him. The rest, including Harry (Frenchman), seem rather callous to their condition. All seem attentive to our morning and evening prayers, which Henry reads, his voice being strongest. There is no complaining or swearing aboard, which is a great comfort. Henry and I have quiet little evening chats, which are of great comfort and consolation to us, even though they are on very painful subjects. Latitude 16° 44' north, longitude, chronometer, 119° 20'. Reduce ration to 1/4 of a biscuit a day to each man. 2 quarts breadcrumbs left, 1/3 of a ham, 3 small cans of oysters, and 20 gallons of water. Captain's log. May 30th. Latitude 17° 17'. Last night a comparatively quiet one. Had a good breeze which enabled us to head about north-northwest. The result shows for itself on our latitude to day. Made over 33 miles of northing since yesterday's observation. Shipped but little water, so all hands did some sleeping. This noon, upon general agreement, we have changed our course to west by north. Our reasons for this are good. We are just in the latitude of a group of islands, the American group, though a long way east of them. Our prevailing wind, trade, is from northeast. Our chance is equally good of seeing vessels, and lastly, by sailing free, we do not waste time, which, as our provisions are very low, is a great object. It is a hard scratch and a long 650 miles, but is, all in all, our best course. It is perfectly useless to try to beat to windward with this boat, so the other isles, the Revillagigedo group, are of no account to us. Our rations at 9 a.m. yesterday was a piece of ham 2 inches square and about as thin as it could be cut, and 1/8 of a biscuit, with about a gill of water. At 5 p.m. we had about a quarter of a biscuit, 5 oysters, which constitute 1/15 of a can, 1½ tablespoons full of the juice, and a gill of water. Our stores, however, will not stand even 2 such meals a day as the above. We have got to reduce the rations further, for our bread is almost gone. We have now left 1 can of oysters, about 3 pounds of raisins, 1 can of soup and bouillie, less than half a ham, and about 3 pints of biscuit crumbs. God help us and provide for us. Somehow I feel much encouraged by this change of course we inaugurated today. May 31st. Very little to chronicle today. Last night was cold, but not very wet. Made good headway all the 24 hours. God grant us deliverance soon in the shape of a ship, or if not, strength to reach the American group of islands. This a.m. the bread bag was found open and some bread missing. We dislike to suspect anyone of such a rascally act, but there is no question that this grave crime has been committed. 2 days will certainly finish the remaining morsels. Day obscured until about 3 p.m. when the wind and sea always seem to increase, but afterward generally subside somewhat. We have kept an anxious lookout for vessels all day, but it was all for naught. The hope was vain. The captain has lost his glasses, and therefore he cannot read our pocket prayer books as much as I think he would like, though he is not familiar with them. He is a good man, and has been most kind to us, almost fatherly. He says if he had been offered the command of the ship sooner, he should have brought his 2 daughters with him. Naturally enough, he is now devoutly thankful he did not. 2 meals a day, of 14 raisins and a piece of cracker the size of a cent, for tea, and a gill of water and a piece of ham and a piece of bread each the size of a cent for breakfast. Captain's Log. June 1st. Last night and today sea very high and cobbling, breaking over and making us all wet and cold. Weather squally, and there is no doubt that only careful management, with God's protecting care, preserved us through both the night and the day, and really it is most marvellous how every morsel that passes our lips is blessed to us. It makes me think daily of the miracles of the loaves and the fishes. Henry keeps up wonderfully, which is a great consolation to me. I somehow have great confidence and hope that our afflictions will soon be ended, though we are running rapidly across the track of both outward and inward bound vessels, and away from them. Our chief hope is a whaler, man of war, or some Australian ship. The islands we are steering for are put down in Bowditch, but on my map are said to be doubtful. God grant they may be there. Hardest day yet. Captain's Log. June 2nd. Latitude 18 degrees 9'. Last night much like the previous one, squally and cloudy, with slight showers of rain and a heavy sea. This morning much of the same. Toward noon, however, the sea went down somewhat, and, although it is still high, it is a great deal more comfortable. The sun also was out a good part of the time, which has not been the case for a day or two. It is a great blessing, as it dries us. The charitable breeze keeps off thirst wonderfully, so that we even save water out of our scanty allowances. We see very few birds now except Mother Carey's chickens, occasionally a boatswain, and some sea birds that keep continually darting about just over the tops of the waves. I cannot help thinking of the cheerful and comfortable time we had aboard the Hornet. 2 days scanty supplies left, 10 rations of water apiece, and a little morsel of bread, but the sun shines and God is merciful. Captain's Log. Sunday, June 3rd, latitude 17 degrees 54'. Heavy sea all night, and from 4 a.m. very wet, the sea breaking over us in frequent sluices, and soaking everything aft particularly. All day the sea has been very high, and it is a wonder that we were not swamped. Heaven grant that it may go down this evening. Our suspense and condition are getting terrible. I managed this morning to crawl, more than step, to the forward end of the boat, and was surprised to find I was so weak, especially in the legs and knees. The sun has been out again, and I have dried some things, and hope for a better night. June 4th, latitude 17 degrees 6', longitude 131 degrees 30'. Shipped hardly any seas last night, and today the sea has gone down somewhat, although it is still too high for comfort, as we have an occasional reminder that water is wet. The sun has been out all day, and so we have had a good drying. I have been trying for the past 10 or 12 days to get a pair of drawers dry enough to put on, and today at last succeeded. I mention this to show the state in which we have lived. If our chronometer is anywhere near right, we ought to see the American Isles tomorrow or next day. If they are not there, we have only the chance for a few days of a stray ship, for we cannot eke out the provisions more than 5 or 6 days longer, and our strength is failing very fast. I was much surprised today to note how my legs have wasted away above my knees. They are hardly thicker than my upper arm used to be. Still, I trust in God's infinite mercy and feel sure he will do what is best for us. To survive as we have done 32 days in an open boat, with only about 10 days' fair provisions, for 31 men in the first place, and these twice divided subsequently, is more than mere unassisted human art and strength could have accomplished or endured. Bread and raisins all gone. Captain's Log. Men growing dreadfully discontented, and awful grumbling and unpleasant talking is arising. God save us from all strife of men, and if we must die now, take us himself, and not embitter our bitter death still more. Henry's Log. June 5th, quiet night and pretty comfortable day, though our sail and block show signs of failing, and need taking down, which latter is something of a job, as it requires the climbing of the mast. We also had news from forward, there being discontent and some threatening complaints of unfair allowances, etc. All as unreasonable as foolish. Still these things bid us be on our guard. I am getting miserably weak, but try to keep up the best I can. If we cannot find those isles, we can only try to make northwest and get in the track of Sandwich Island bound vessels, living as best we can in the meantime. Today we have changed to one meal, and that at about noon, with a small ration of water at 8 or 9 a.m., another at 12 midday, and a third at 5 or 6 p.m. Nothing left but a little piece of ham and a gill of water all round. Captain's log. Note secretly passed by Henry to his brother. Cox told me last night there is getting to be a good deal of ugly talk among the men against the captain and us aft. Harry, Jack, and Fred especially. They say that the captain is the cause of all, that he did not try to save the ship at all, nor to get provisions, and even would not let the men put in some they had, and that partiality is shown us in apportioning our rations aft. Jack asked Cox the other day if he would starve first or eat human flesh. Cox answered he would starve. Jack then told him it would be only killing himself. If we do not find these islands, we would do well to prepare for anything. Harry is the loudest of all. Reply. We can depend on Charlie, I think, and Thomas and Cox, can we not? Second note. I guess so, and very likely on Peter, but there is no telling. Charlie and Cox are certain. There is nothing definite said or hinted as yet, as I understand Cox, but starving men are the same as maniacs. It would be well to keep a watch on your pistol so as to have it and the cartridges safe from theft. Henry's log, June 5th. Dreadful forebodings. God spare us from all such horrors. Some of the men getting to talk a good deal. Nothing to write down. Heart very sad. Henry's log, June 6th. Passed some seaweed and something that looked like the trunk of an old tree, but no birds. Beginning to be afraid islands not there. Today it was said to the captain, in the hearing of all, that some of the men would not shrink when a man was dead from using the flesh, though they would not kill. Horrible! God give us all full use of our reason and spare us from such things. From plague, pestilence, and famine, from battle and murder, and from sudden death. Good Lord, deliver us. June 6th. Latitude 16 degrees 30 minutes, longitude, chronometer, 134 degrees. Dry night and wind steady enough to require no change in sail, but this a.m. an attempt to lower it proved abortive. First, the third mate tried and got up to the block and fastened a temporary arrangement to reeve the halyards through, but had to come down, weak and almost fainting, before finishing. Then Joe tried, and after twice ascending, fixed it and brought down the block, but it was very exhausting work, and afterward he was good for nothing all day. The clue iron which we are trying to make serve for the broken block works, however, very indifferently, and will, I am afraid, soon cut the rope. It is very necessary to get everything connected with the sail in good, easy running order before we get too weak to do anything with it. Only 3 meals left. Captain's log. June 7th. Latitude 16 degrees 35 minutes north, longitude 136 degrees 30 minutes west. Night wet and uncomfortable. Today shows us pretty conclusively that the American Isles are not here, though we have had some signs that looked like them. At noon we decided to abandon looking any further for them, and tonight haul a little more northerly, so as to get in the way of Sandwich Island vessels, which fortunately come down pretty well this way, say to latitude 19 degrees to 20 degrees, to get the benefit of the trade winds. Of course all the westing we have made is gain, and I hope the chronometer is wrong in our favour, for I do not see how any such delicate instrument can keep good time with the constant jarring and thumping we get from the sea. With the strong trade we have, I hope that a week from Sunday will put us in sight of the Sandwich Islands, if we are not saved before that time by being picked up. June 8th. My cough troubled me a good deal last night, and therefore I got hardly any sleep at all. Still I make out pretty well, and should not complain. Yesterday the third mate mended the block, and this p.m. the sail, after some difficulty, was got down, and Harry got to the top of the mast and rove the halyards through after some hardship, so that it now works easy and well. This getting up the mast is no easy matter at any time with the sea we have, and is very exhausting in our present state. We could only reward Harry by an extra ration of water. We have made good time in course to-day. Heading her up, however, makes the boat ship seas, and keeps us all wet. However, it cannot be helped. Riding is a rather precarious thing these times. Our meal to-day for the 15 consists of half a can of soup and bouillie, the other half is reserved for to-morrow. Henry still keeps up grandly and is a great favourite. God grant he may be spared. A better feeling prevails among the men. Captain's log. June 9th. Latitude 17 degrees 53 minutes, Finished today, I may say, our whole stock of provisions. We have only left a lower end of a ham bone, with some of the outer rind and skin on. In regard to water, however, I think we have got 10 days' supply at our present rate of allowance. This, with what nourishment we can get from bootlegs and such chewable matter, we hope will enable us to weather it out till we get to the Sandwich Islands, or, sailing in the meantime in the track of vessels thither bound, be picked up. My hope is in the latter, for in all human probability I cannot stand the other. Still we have been marvellously protected, and God, I hope, will preserve us all in his own good time and way. The men are getting weaker, but are still quiet and orderly. Sunday, June 10th. Latitude 18° 40', longitude 142° 34'. A pretty good night last night, with some wettings, and again another beautiful Sunday. I cannot but think how we should all enjoy it at home, and what a contrast is here. How terrible their suspense must begin to be. God grant it may be relieved before very long, and he certainly seems to be with us in everything we do, and has preserved this boat miraculously, for since we left the ship we have sailed considerably over 3,000 miles, which, taking into consideration our meagre stock of provisions, is almost unprecedented. As yet I do not feel the stint of food so much as I do that of water. Even Henry, who is naturally a great water drinker, can save half of his allowance from time to time, when I cannot. My diseased throat may have something to do with that, however. Henry Ferguson's log. Sunday, June 10th. Our ham bone has given us a taste of food today, and we have got left a little meat and the remainder of the bone for tomorrow. Certainly never was there such a sweet knuckle bone, or one which was so thoroughly appreciated. I do not know that I feel any worse than I did last Sunday, notwithstanding the reduction of diet, and I trust that we may all have strength given us to sustain the sufferings and hardships of the coming week. We estimate that we are within 700 miles of the Sandwich Islands, and that our average daily is somewhat over 100 miles, so that our hopes have some foundation in reason. Heaven send we may all live to reach land. June 11th. Ate the meat and rind of our ham bone, and have the bone and the greasy cloth from around the ham left to eat tomorrow. God send us birds or fish, and let us not perish of hunger, or be brought to the dreadful alternative of feeding on human flesh. As I feel now, I do not think anything could persuade me, but you cannot tell what you will do when you are reduced by hunger and your mind wandering. I hope and pray we can make out to reach the islands before we get to this strait, but we have 1 or 2 pretty desperate men aboard, though they are quiet now. It is my firm trust and belief that we are going to be saved. All food gone. Captain's log. June 12th. Stiff breeze and we are fairly flying, dead ahead of it, and towards the islands. Good hopes, but the prospects of hunger are awful. Ate ham bone today. It is the captain's birthday. He is 54 years old today. June 13th. The ham rags are not gone yet, and the bootlegs we find are very palatable after we get the salt out of them. A little smoke, I think, does some little good, but I don't know. June 14th. Hunger does not pain us as much, but we are dreadful weak. Our water is getting frightfully low. God grant we may see land soon. Nothing to eat, but feel better than I did yesterday. Toward evening we saw a magnificent double rainbow, the first we had seen. Captain said, "Cheer up, boys, it's a prophecy. It's the bow of promise." June 15th. God forever be praised for his infinite mercy to us. Land in sight. Rapidly neared it, and soon were sure of it. 2 noble Kanakas swam out and took the boat ashore. We were joyfully received by 2 white men, Mr. Jones and his steward Charlie, and a crowd of native men, women, and children. They treated us splendidly, aided us and carried us up the bank, and brought us water, poi, bananas, and green cocoanuts; but the white men took care of us and prevented those who would have eaten too much from doing so. Everybody overjoyed to see us, and all sympathy expressed in faces, deeds, and words. We were then helped up to the house, and help we needed. Mr. Jones and his steward Charlie are the only white men here. Treated us splendidly. Gave us first about a teaspoonful of spirits in water, and then to each a cup of hot tea with a little bread. Takes every care of us. Gave us later another cup of tea, and bread the same, and then let us go to rest. It is the happiest day of my life. God in his mercy has heard our prayer, and we are saved. Everybody is so kind, words cannot tell. June 16th. Mr. Jones gave us a delightful bed, and we surely had a good night's rest, but not sleep. We were too happy to sleep. They gave Captain a little room and the same to Sam and me, and gave the sitting room to the men. We enjoyed the night, but did not sleep, would keep the reality, and not let it turn into a delusion, dreaded that we might wake up and find ourselves in the boat again. They have told their story, and in their own language. I hardly know which to admire most, the steady persistence and faithfulness with which they kept up their journals through such a weary time, or the unwavering hopefulness they showed from first to last, in the face of the seeming hopelessness of rescue. They wanted to doctor the diaries a little, but it did not appear to me that any emendations were necessary. A careful and elegantly composed log book, gotten up in the midst of thirst, starvation, and a stormy sea, would seem so strikingly unnatural that its genuineness might reasonably be questioned. The men were so carefully nursed where they landed, at Luapahoho on the island of Hawaii, that all except one seaman were able to walk about within 10 days afterwards. Yet in some cases there had been no action of their bowels for 20 and 30 days, and in one case 44 days. With 10 days' provisions, Captain Mitchell performed this extraordinary voyage of 43 days and 8 hours in an open boat, sailing 4,000 miles in reality, and 3,360 by direct courses, and brought every man safe to land. Each individual day of those 6 weeks bears its testimony to his watchfulness, his prudence, his cool courage, his foresight, perseverance, and fidelity to his duty, and his rare intelligence. In him are the elements of greatness. This strange voyage, in its entirety, is an eloquent witness of the watchful presence of an all-powerful Providence, and as such its record carries with it a lesson that cannot be valueless. This presence was distinctly manifested on 2 occasions at least. Henry mentions the fact of the boat going directly before the wind toward the islands on the last day. It was getting late. They had to make land that day or perish. They struck boldly for the shore, and when they had got pretty well in, they lowered the sail, and afterward, not liking the appearance of the reef, tried to hoist it again and retreat, but they were too feeble to accomplish it, and beheld themselves drifting helplessly upon the rocks after all their toils and hardships. And it was all the better. They swept through an almost imperceptible opening in the coral reef and were saved. There was not another place within 35 miles where they could have got to land or found a human habitation. Everywhere else a precipice more than 1,000 feet high comes down like a wall to the sea, with 40 fathoms water at its base, and not even bordered by a strip of ground wide enough for a man to stand open. The other case is that of Cox. The mate's boat had bidden the captains good-bye and departed, but came back directly, and the captain was requested to receive a man. Cox came on board, and was the only man who warned the captain and passengers afterwards, when the conspirators had sworn their lives away. Before closing, a few words ought to be said about the conspiracy. The captain says that for many days he had known that a murderous discontent was brewing by the distraught air of some of the men and the guilty look of others, and so he stayed on guard, slept no more, kept his hatchet hid and close at hand. At this time the famishing, ravenous men were cutting boots, handkerchiefs, and shirts into bits and eating them. They had done so for days. They were even eating the staves of the butter cask. They were wild with hunger. They were in a manner insane, and in the judgment of no just and merciful man responsible for their words or deeds. They afterward dreaded in Honolulu that the captain and passengers would take legal measures against them because of their murderous conspiracy, but their fears were without foundation. These gentlemen well understood the case, and only pitied the men. They insisted for some time that I should leave out all mention of the conspiracy from their published journals. That the men were frenzied is shown by the fact that they told Cox, in a whispered conference at night, that the captain had all the ship's money in the boat, $1 million in gold and silver, just about enough to sink such a craft. They were to watch until such time as the captain might become worn out and fall asleep, and then kill him and the passengers. They were afraid of Ferguson's pistol and the captain's hatchet, and laid many a plan for getting hold of the weapons. They told Cox they would divide the money with him if he kept quiet and helped, but they would kill him if he exposed them. He refused to join the conspiracy, and they said he should die, and so after that, day after day and night after night, he did not go to sleep, but kept watch upon them in fear for his life. The captain and passengers remained under arms and watched also, but talked pleasantly and gave no sign that they knew what was in the men's minds. The captain spoke now and then of his strength holding out being a necessity, since only he could use the chart and the quadrant and find the land. By way of conclusion, it may be well enough to say that up to the present time no tidings have been received of the poor fellows in the missing boats. It seems almost idle now to hope that they are saved. Honolulu, Sandwich Islands, July 2nd, 1866. End of 43 Days in an Open Boat by Mark Twain.
A Free Man's Worship by Bertrand Russell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. To Dr. Faustus, in his study Mephistopheles, told the history of creation, saying, "The endless praise of the choir of angels had begun to grow wearisome. For, after all, did he not deserve their praise? Had he not given them endless joy? Would it not be more amusing to obtain undeserved praise, to be worshipped by beings whom he tortured?" He smiled inwardly, and resolved that the great drama should be performed. For countless ages the hot nebula whirled aimlessly through space. At length it began to take shape. The central mass threw off planets. The planets cooled. Boiling seas and burning mountains heaved and tossed. From black masses of cloud, hot sheets of rain deluged the barely solid crust. And now the first germ of life grew in the depths of the ocean, and developed rapidly, in the fructifying warmth, into vast forest trees, huge ferns springing from the damp mold, sea monsters, breathing, fighting, devouring, and passing away. And from the monsters, as the play unfolded itself, man was born, with the power of thought, the knowledge of good and evil, and the cruel thirst for worship. And man saw that all is passing in this mad, monstrous world, that all is struggling to snatch at any cost a few brief moments of life before death's inexorable decree. And man said, "There is a hidden purpose, could we but fathom it, and the purpose is good, for we must reverence something, and in the visible world there is nothing worthy of reverence." But man stood aside from the struggle, resolving that God intended harmony to come out of chaos by human efforts. And when he followed the instincts which God had transmitted to him from his ancestry of beasts of prey, he called it sin, and asked God to forgive him. But he doubted that he could be justly forgiven, until he invented a divine plan by which God's wrath was to have been appeased. And seeing the present was bad, he made it yet worse, that thereby the future might be better. And he gave God thanks for the strength that enabled him to forego even the joys that were possible. And God smiled, and when he saw that man had become perfect in renunciation and worship, he sent another sun through the sky, which crashed into man's sun, and all returned again to nebula. "Yes," he murmured, "it was a good play. I will have it performed again." Such, in outline, but even more purposeless, more void of meaning, is the world which science presents for our belief. Amidst such a world, if anywhere, our ideals henceforward must find a home. That man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. His growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. That all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. That the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. And all these things if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand only within the scaffolding of these truths. Only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. How, in such an alien and inhuman world, can so a powerless creature as man preserve his aspirations untarnished? A strange mystery it is that nature, omnipotent but blind, in the revolutions of her secular hurryings through the abysses of space, has brought forth at last a child, subject still to her power, but gifted with sight, with knowledge of good and evil, with the capacity of judging all the works of his unthinking mother. In spite of death, the mark and seal of their parental control, man is yet free, during his brief years, to examine, to criticize, to know, and, in imagination, to create. To him alone, in the world with which he is acquainted, this freedom belongs, and in this lies his superiority to the resistless forces that control his outward life. The savage, like ourselves, feels the oppression of his impotence before the powers of nature, but having in himself nothing that he respects more than power, he is willing to prostrate himself before his gods, without inquiring whether they are worthy of his worship. Pathetic and very terrible is the long history of cruelty and torture, of degradation and human sacrifice, endured in the hope of placating the jealous gods. Surely, a trembling believer thinks, when what is most precious has been freely given, their lust for blood must be appeased, and more will not be required. The religion of Moloch, as such creeds may be generically called, is in the essence the cringing submission of the slave, who dare not, even in his heart, allow the thought that his master deserves no adulation. Since the independence of ideals is not yet acknowledged, power may be freely worshipped and receive an unlimited respect despite its wanton infliction of pain. But gradually, as morality grows bolder, the claim of the ideal world begins to be felt, and worship, if it is not to cease, must be given to gods of another kind than those created by the savage. Some, though they feel the demands of the ideal, will still consciously reject them, still urging that naked power is worthy of worship. Such is the attitude inculcated in God's answer to Yup. Out of the whirlwind, the divine power and knowledge are paraded, but of the divine goodness there is no hint. Such is also the attitude of those who, in our own day, base their morality upon the struggle for survival, maintaining that the survivors are necessarily the fittest. But others, not content with an answer so repugnant to the moral sense, will adopt the position which we have become accustomed to regard as specially religious, maintaining that, in some hidden manner, the world of fact is really harmonious with the world of ideals. Thus man creates God, all-powerful and all-good, the mystic unity of what is and what should be. But the world of fact, after all, is not good, and, in submitting our judgment to it, there is an element of slavishness from which our thoughts must be purged. For in all things it is well to exalt the dignity of man, by freeing him as far as possible from the tyranny of non-human power. When we have realized that power is largely bad, that man, with his knowledge of good and evil, is but a helpless atom in a world which has no such knowledge, the choice is again presented to us. Shall we worship force, or shall we worship goodness? Shall our God exist in the evil, or shall he be recognized as the creation of our own conscience? The answer to this question is very momentous, and affects profoundly our whole morality. The worship of force, Carlyle and Nietzsche, and a creed of militarism have accustomed us, is the result of failure to maintain our own ideals against a hostile universe. It is itself a prostrate submission to evil, a sacrifice of our best to Moloch. If strength, indeed, is to be respected, let us respect rather the strength of those who refuse that false recognition of facts, which fails to recognize that facts are often bad. Let us admit that in the world we know, there are many things that would be better otherwise, and that the ideals to which we do and must adhere are not realized in the realm of matter. Let us preserve our respect for truth, for beauty, for the ideal of perfection which life does not permit us to attain, though none of these things meet with the approval of the unconscious universe. If power is bad, as it seems to be, let us reject it from our hearts. In this lies man's true freedom, in a determination to worship only the God created by our own love of the good, to respect only the heaven which inspires the insight of our best moments. In action and desire, we must submit perpetually to the tyranny of outside forces. But in thought and aspiration, we are free, free from our fellow men, free from the petty planet on which our bodies impotently crawl, free even, while we live, from the tyranny of death. Let us learn, then, that energy of faith which enables us to live constantly in the vision of the good, and let us descend, in action, into the world of fact, with that vision always before us. When first the opposition of fact and ideal grows fully visible, a spirit of fiery revolt, a fierce hatred of the gods, seem necessary to the assertion of freedom. To defy with Promethean constancy a hostile universe, to keep its evil always in view, always actively hated, to refuse no pain that the malice of power can invent, appears to be the duty of all who will not bow before the inevitable. But indignation is still a bondage, for it compels our thoughts to be occupied with an evil world, and in the fierceness of desire from which rebellion springs, there is a kind of self-assertion which it is necessary for the wise to overcome. Indignation is a submission of our thoughts, but not of our desires. The Stoic freedom in which wisdom consists is found in the submission of our desires, but not of our thoughts. From the submission of our desires springs the virtue of resignation. From the freedom of our thoughts springs the whole world of art and philosophy, and the vision of beauty by which, at last, we have reconquered a reluctant world. But the vision of beauty is possible only to unfettered contemplation, to thoughts not weighed by the load of eager wishes. And this freedom comes only to those who no longer ask of life that it shall yield them any of those personal goods that are subject to the mutation of time. Although the necessity of renunciation is evidence of the existence of evil, yet Christianity, in preaching it, has shown a wisdom exceeding that of the Promethean philosophy of rebellion. It must be admitted that, of the things we desire, some, though they prove impossible, are yet real goods. Others, however, are ardently longed for, do not form part of a fully purified ideal. The belief that what must be renounced is bad, though sometimes false, is far less often false than untamed passion supposes, and the creed of religion, by providing a reason for proving that it is never false, has been the means of purifying our hopes by the discovery of many austere truths. But there is in resignation a further good element. Even real goods, when they are unattainable, ought not to be fretfully desired. To every man comes, sooner or later, the great renunciation. For the young, there is nothing unattainable. A good thing desired with the whole force of a passionate will, and yet impossible, is to them not credible. Yet by death, by illness, by poverty, or by the voice of duty, we must learn, each one of us, that the world was not made for us, and that, however beautiful may be the things we crave for, fate may nevertheless forbid them. It is the part of courage, when misfortune comes, to bear without repining the ruin of our hopes, to turn away from our thoughts from vain regrets. This degree of submission to power is not only just and right, it is the very gate of wisdom. Passive renunciation is not the whole wisdom, for not by renunciation alone can we build a temple for the worship of our own ideals. Haunting foreshadowings of the temple appear in the realm of imagination, in music, in architecture, in the untroubled kingdom of reason, and in the golden sunset magic of lyrics, where beauty shines and glows, remote from the touch of sorrow, remote from the fear of change, remote from the failures and disenchantments of the world of fact. In the contemplation of these things, the vision of heaven will shape itself in our hearts, giving at once a touchstone to judge the world about us, and an inspiration by which to fashion to our needs whatever is not incapable of serving as a stone in the sacred temple. Except for those rare spirits that are born without sin, there is a cavern of darkness to be traversed before that temple can be entered. The gate of the cavern is despair, and its floor is paved with the gravestones of abandoned hopes. There self must die. There the eagerness, the greed of untamed desire must be slain. For only so can the soul be freed from the empire of fate. But out of the cavern, the gate of renunciation leads again to the daylight of wisdom, by whose radiance a new insight, a new joy, a new tenderness shine forth to gladden the pilgrim's heart, when, without the bitterness of impotent rebellion, we have learned both to resign ourselves to the outward rule of fate and to recognize that the non-human world is unworthy of our worship. It becomes possible at last so to transform and refashion the unconscious universe, so to transmute it in the crucible of imagination, that a new image of shining gold replaces the old idol of clay. In all the multiform facts of the world, in the visual shapes of trees and mountains and clouds, in the events in the life of man, even in the very omnipotence of death, the insight of creative idealism can find a reflection of a beauty which its own thoughts first made. In this way mind asserts its subtle mastery over the thoughtless forces of nature. The more evil the material with which it deals, the more thwarting to untrained desire. The greater is its achievement in inducing the reluctant rock to yield up its hidden treasures, the prouder its victory in compelling the opposing forces to swell the pageant of its triumph. Of all the arts, tragedy is the proudest, the most triumphant, for it builds its shining citadel in the very center of the enemy's country, on the very summit of its highest mountain. From its impregnable watchtowers, his camps and arsenals, his columns and forts, are all revealed. Within its walls the free life continues, while the legions of death and pain and despair, and all the servile captains of tyrant fate, afford the burghers of that dauntless city new spectacles of beauty. Happy those sacred ramparts, thrice happy the dwellers on that all-seeing eminence. Honor to those brave warriors who, through countless ages of warfare, have preserved for us the priceless heritage of liberty, and have kept undefiled by sacrilegious invaders the home of the unsubdued. But the beauty of tragedy does but make visible a quality which, in more or less obvious shapes, is present always and everywhere in life, in the spectacle of death, in the endurance of intolerable pain, and in the irrevocableness of a vanished past. There is a secretness, an overpowering awe, a feeling of the vastness, the depth, the inexhaustible mystery of existence, in which, as by some strange marriage of pain, the sufferer is bound to a world by bonds of sorrow. In these moments of insight we lose all eagerness of temporary desire, all struggling and striving for petty ends, all care for the little trivial things that, to a superficial view, make up the common life of day by day. We see, surrounding the narrow raft illuminated by the flickering light of human comradeship, the dark ocean on whose rolling waves we toss for a brief hour. From the great night without, a chill blast breaks in upon our refuge. All the loneliness of humanity amid hostile forces is concentrated upon the individual soul, which must struggle alone, what of courage it can command, against the whole weight of a universe that cares nothing for its hopes and fears. Victory in this struggle with the powers of darkness is the true baptism into the glorious company of heroes, the true initiation into the overmastering beauty of human existence. From that awful encounter of the soul with the outer world, renunciation, wisdom, and charity are born, and with their birth a new life begins. To take into the inmost shrine of the soul the irresistible forces whose puppets we seem to be, death and change, the irrevocableness of the past, and the powerlessness of man before the blind hurry of the universe from vanity to vanity. To feel these things and to know them is to conquer them. This is the reason why the past has such magical power. The beauty of its motionless and silent pictures is like the enchanted purity of late autumn, when the leaves, though one breath would make them fall, still glow against the sky in golden glory. The past does not change or strive. Like Duncan, after life's fitful fever it sleeps well. What was eager and grasping, what was petty and transitory, has faded away. The things that were beautiful and eternal shine out of it like stars in the night. Its beauty, to a soul not worthy of it, is endurable, but to a soul which has conquered fate, it is the key of religion. The life of man, viewed outwardly, is but a small thing in comparison with the forces of nature. The slave is doomed to worship time and fate and death, because they are greater than anything he finds in himself, and because all his thoughts are of things which they devour. But, great as they are, to think of them greatly, to feel their passionless splendor, is greater still, and such thought makes us free men. We no longer bow before the inevitable in oriental subjection, but we absorb it and make it part of ourselves. To abandon the struggle for private happiness, to expel all eagerness of temporary desire, to burn with passion for eternal things, this is emancipation, and this is the free man's worship. And this liberation is effected by a contemplation of fate, for fate itself is subdued by the mind which leaves nothing to be purged by the purifying fire of time. United with his fellow men by the strongest of all ties, the tie of a common doom, the free man finds that a new vision is with him always, shedding over every daily task the light of love. The life of man is a long march through the night, surrounded by invisible foes, tortured by weariness and pain, towards a goal that few can hope to reach, and where none may tarry long. One by one, as they march, our comrades vanish from our sight, seized by the silent orders of omnipotent death. Very brief is the time in which we can help them, in which their happiness or misery is decided. Be it ours to shed sunshine on their path, to lighten their sorrows by the balm of sympathy, to give them the pure joy of a never-tiring affection, to strengthen failing courage, to instill faith in hours of despair. Let us not weigh in grudging scales their merits and demerits. Let us think only of their need, of the sorrows, the difficulties, perhaps the blindness that make the misery of their lives. Let us remember that they are fellow sufferers in the same darkness, actors in the same tragedy with ourselves. And so, when their day is over, when their good and their evil has become eternal by the immortality of the past, be it ours to feel that where they suffered, where they failed, no deed of ours was the cause. But wherever a spark of the divine fire kindled in their hearts, we were ready with encouragement, with sympathy, with brave words in which high courage glowed. Brief and powerless is man's life. On him and all his race the slow, sure doom falls pitiless and dark, blind to good and evil, reckless of destruction. Omnipotent matter rolls on its relentless way, for man, condemned today to lose his dearest, tomorrow himself to pass through the gate of darkness, it remains only to cherish, ere yet the blow falls, the lofty thoughts that ennoble his little day, disdaining the coward terrors of the slave of fate, to worship at the shrine that his own hands have built, undismayed by the empire of change. to preserve a mind free from the wanton tyranny that rules his outward life, proudly defiant of the irresistible forces that tolerate for a moment his knowledge and his condemnation, to sustain alone a wary but unyielding Atlas, the world that his own ideals have fashioned, despite the trampling march of unconscious power. End of A Free Man's Worship by Bertrand Russell.
Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, given November 19, 1863, on the battlefield near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, USA. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for the living rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honoured dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. End of the Gettysburg Address by President Lincoln. Read by Esther Camus on Thursday, March 30th, 2017.